Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the Right on Crime podcast. My name is Danny Murphy. I serve as the Right on Crime State Director for both Virginia and West Virginia. Today, I'm joined by my colleague and friend, Kurt Altman. Kurt serves as the Right on Crime State Director for Arizona and New Mexico.
West Mexico, New Mexico, and Arizona. Hey, Danny, man, good to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Hey, today we're here talking about a concept that plagues many folks that are trying to build a life after incarceration. It's called debanking. And so let's level set to begin with, if we can, Kurt. What is debanking? What does that generally mean?
Well, generally it means, simple answer is people that can't get bank accounts, people that don't have bank accounts. And you had mentioned we're talking about people life after incarceration. It affects a lot of those folks that come out of prisons or jails and just don't have bank accounts. And life without a bank account in America these days is pretty tough to live.
Well, so let's talk about that for a moment. You and I, on every day, use our debit card, our credit card for any number of transactions. Buying a water bottle from the convenience store, we're using a card, right? How does the inability to have a card or access to a bank account, how might that affect somebody who's coming out of incarceration and trying to start their life?
Well, first of all, if you don't have a bank account, there's nothing to tie that card to, right? Because when you use your debit card, and when I use your debit card, which I appreciate, thanks.
Sure.
It's tied to a bank account. It draws funds from your bank account. It's all electronic, this magical electronic thing, right? If they don't have that, they can't do that. They have to operate in cash. And cash is becoming less and less and less accepted, frankly. Here in Austin, I was at a place last night, no cash. Like if I didn't have cards, couldn't have bought any food. Couldn't have purchased any food.
Right. And the reality is that a purely cash environment, maybe at low levels, is not such a big deal. But when you're trying to transact and make larger purchases or pay rent or utilities or things like that, frankly, there's a stigma almost associated with it, because the presumption almost is, hey, why is this guy paying with nothing but cash? And so there is a stigma associated with it. Let me give you an example of a client that I recently represented. Okay, I represented a client who we appeared in circuit court in Virginia, and he was a probation violation client. Okay, he had been violated, is what they call, right, for leaving the state to pursue work. Nothing wrong with leaving the state to pursue work. The problem was he had not told his probation officer that he was doing it. So he violated. But when I spoke with him, I asked him, "Hey, what's going on? What are you doing here?" And he said there was a roofing job that he needed, and they pay cash. And it was across the border from Virginia in Tennessee, and he went to it. He pursued work.
You got to live.
He has to make some money. And I said, "Well, what's going on? Why are you only getting cash or seeking cash jobs?" And he said, "Danny, I don't have an ID. I don't have a Social Security card to be able to apply for a bank account." And for a moment, it struck me just the challenges people who are trying to re-enter society and live a law-abiding life, the challenges that they face when they don't have a driver's license or a Social Security card, or in this case, a bank account, the ability to transact how you or I might ordinarily transact in a W-2 type of work relationship where we're receiving direct deposits and things of that nature. And so that was an eye-opening moment for me, right? So talk a little bit about why people can't get bank accounts. What are the barriers preventing formerly incarcerated from receiving or opening a bank account?
Well, if you walk into a bank and you're like, I got $5,000 in cash in my pocket, it's everything I have, I want to open a bank account, what's the first thing they're going to ask you? You say, "Do you have a driver's license?"
Right.
"No, I don't." And then they look at you funny, and you have $5,000 in cash in your pocket.
Right.
And they're like, "Oh, well, okay, well, maybe we can do it without a driver's license. We're going to need your passport, address, and Social Security card."
So let me ask you this. Why is that? Why are banks ask? Perhaps it's almost obvious on its face, but why do banks have to have that sort of information in order to open an account for a customer?
They have to have it tied to somebody, and somewhere that bank account, they send you statements. Mostly, I guess, maybe it's all electronic now too, but they send you statements to an address. Some of these folks that come out don't have a permanent address yet. Maybe they're living in temporary housing. Maybe they're living with a friend.
Right.
They don't have an address. All that identification is tied to your bank account, and the banks require all that. And many of these folks legitimately don't have those things.
Right.
And then what do? And frankly, Danny, as you know, because you represent clients like this, I represent clients like this, the ones that try to do the right thing and get that bank account, when they start running into brick walls, like the one that's behind you, they get frustrated. They get frustrated fast. Maybe that's not the right thing, but it's understandable.
Right.
And then they stop. And they're like, I can't do this anyway. I'm never going to have a bank account. I'll just jump from the roofer that pays me cash to somebody else that pays me cash to somebody else.
Or God forbid, turning to other illicit means. I'll steal something. I'll do this or that. I'll do whatever they have to do to make ends meet. But let me back out just a little bit, because this isn't just a decision by banks necessarily to not open bank accounts for people who don't have these sort of credentials, a driver's license or an ID. Understandably so, banks are put in a position where they're required to know their customer, right? Are you familiar with that? The Know Your Customer requirements of the Bank Secrecy Act, which is ultimately a federal law that regulates banks. And so there's an obligation by banks, by banking institutions, to mitigate risk, right? They're obligated under federal law to have all of the personal information of their clients, their customers, and then they also have to balance that against the relative risk of opening an account for that individual. So do you blame banks? I mean, is it the bank's fault that they're not doing this? What do you think?
No, I mean, I think we've gotten there through regulation and things like that. But yeah, the banks are taking money, people's money, and like lending. This is how banks work. They take your money. You have a bank account. It's there, but they're lending that money elsewhere, and they're doing this, and it's going from here to there. So they have to mitigate that risk, and they're probably the most, well, if not the most, one of the most regulated. Probably rightfully so. I'm not a big regulation fan, but probably rightfully so. One of the most regulated industries in the nation because of that risk. Because you've heard the stories of the savings and loan crisis and banks failing, and the Great Depression run on banks. If they don't mitigate that risk, it could be catastrophic for the nation and the nation's economy.
That's right.
I mean, that's kind of maybe hyperbole, but I think it's true.
No, it is true, and but there are other categories of individuals who, although perhaps they do have driver's licenses or identification at the very least, but who also pose a risk to banks. But banks, and so, for example, young students, an 18-year-old graduating from high school, wants to go on to college or starting a new job right out of high school, right? Perhaps doesn't have much of a credit history at all, poses a potential risk to banking institutions. But there are systems in place that banks adopt to mitigate risk, but also open accounts for these young citizens, right? And so is that a model that could be replicated, do you think, in a similar way for the formerly incarcerated?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things banks can do, Danny, and it's really becoming a bigger and bigger issue for the very reasons that we talked about, because the economy is moving so far away from cash that banks have to start looking at this more. They have a customer base out there, the folks that come out of being incarcerated that actually are trying to do the right thing, that they need to somehow adapt to. I know that my kids, when they open their bank accounts, they open them through me. And I was on the account and they were on the account. As they got older and as their credit got built and they were reliable, thank goodness they've all but one have kind of left the nest and have their own accounts now. And the banks have taken that risk. I think there can be a similar thing done with the banking industry for formerly incarcerated folks. Whether they need somebody else in that account, I don't know if that's the answer. But I know that banks are out there trying, because they see this. One, it's a market for the banks. And two, they see the problem. And it really really, it's kind of like housing and a job are the biggest things that prevent recidivism, right? If somebody comes out of prison, they can get a house or somewhere to live and a job, less likely to recidivate. When's the last time you got a paycheck from an employer? Right? So they get a job. They're like, okay, we need your bank account because we're going to put, every 2 weeks the check's going to go in your bank. I don't have one.
Well, let's even talk about housing and drill down into that. So housing alone largely requires access to banking or credit, right? Mm-hmm. And so either you're submitting an application for a lease, you're hoping to purchase a small family home or a starter home. You've got to have credit worthiness, and you've got to have a bank account for funds to be drawn from. I don't know that there's anybody who's going to lease a property to somebody based solely on a cash promise, a promise to pay future rents in cash, right? And so, talk a little bit more about the costs to the individual, to the human being, when they can't access credit or banking by virtue of these barriers.
It raises their costs because I'll tell you, if they're paying their rent in money orders, every month they go to the Circle K or whatever to get $2,500 in money orders because they have cash. Their landlord won't take the cash, but they'll take the money orders. So they go get those money orders. Well, that $2,500 worth of money orders, I don't know what Circle K charges you, but they're not giving them to you for free. It's not an even exchange, right? So maybe it's 10%, 20%, 25% over that. So that $2,500 rent now became, I'm bad at math, $2,750, whatever.
Yep.
And so that's a cost. It's like a tax. It's like a tax for not having a bank account. Don't blame the people that are providing the money orders. That's their business. But man, they're not paying $2,500 in rent. They're paying $2,750.
The same thing could be said for we talk about cash jobs, but there are employers who want to protect themselves. They want to hire somebody. They want to pay the individual what they're worth. They're not going to hand them actual physical cash, so they'll write a check to that particular person. Here's your paycheck for the week. Well, if the laborer does not have a bank account, he can't cash a check.
Oh, he can.
Well,
where's he going to do it?
Well, so tell us about that. What's the cost to the laborer?
He's going to go to a check cashing place, or a short-term loan place and
payday advance.
Payday advance,
yep.
Right? I got a check, and they're like, oh, sure, you got a check for $2,000. We'll give you $1,650. And they take it because they have.
That's right.
They have to. So they've just been taxed again, and they've lost more money. It's become more expensive for them because they don't have that bank account.
Well, that's exactly right. And as we also know, it's a topic for another discussion. But the fines and the fees that sort of weigh on the formerly incarcerated as they're trying to come back and pursue a law-abiding life. These fines and fees and costs kind of push them down.
Maricopa County Clerk doesn't take cash.
Well, that's very true as well.
Right? They got to pay their probation fees or fines.
That's right.
They don't take cash, so what do they have to do? They don't have a bank account. They can't give them a credit card. They got to go get money orders, or they got to, and that's going to cost them. So those probation fees that they're trying to pay are now 10% more expensive.
That's right. Now, listen, there are other things that people have to pay that don't accept cash. Child support payments. Right. The courts. The court system. Listen, it's a problem without a solution, really, for many people when they cannot get a bank account or a credit account. What are the solutions? We're good at identifying the problems. Yeah. Sometimes not as good at identifying the solutions.
The solutions are the banking industry is big enough to work on these solutions, right? And I think some are. Second chance bank accounts, they have all kinds of different names now. Yep. And some of the major banks have programs where they're starting to open these bank accounts. They're mitigating that risk however banks mitigate the risk. Maybe my interest rate's higher. I don't know. I know there's a number of banks out there now that know that this is, one, an issue, and two, frankly, a market.
Right.
And they're starting to create programs to do it. That's the first step. I've heard things about legislatures getting involved. It scares me. I do a lot of legislative work. I think well-intended, but I don't know that the state legislatures can do much about banks regulated by the federal government.
That's right.
So, congressional act, right? The tough part is for people that believe in freedom and free markets, right? It's like, it's tough to be okay with Congress going, banks, you have to do this for these people because it's their business. But I imagine something's going to come from that because it is a very, very large problem.
Yeah, legislators are good at telling people what they must do, but they're not the ones that are holding the bag when the risk is exposed. Right? It's ultimately the banks that are responsible. They're the ones responsible for the risk and for mitigating the risk. And so I'm not sure that necessarily that a legislative solution is the right solution. I would say that we could work with departments of corrections. We could try to put in place maybe the predicate systems that allow or at least make banking a little bit more accessible for those that are leaving.
At least the documents,
yeah,
right?
That's exactly right.
Your last 6 months, you're serving, at a halfway house. Your last 6 months in the prison, help them get a driver's license.
Right.
Help them. Most of them probably have Social Security numbers, assigned to, but they don't have access to the card. There could be ways that the Department of Corrections, through state funding, last 6 months, 4 months, help these folks get a copy.
That's right.
Of their Social Security card, get a copy, or get a new driver's license, or even if you don't drive. Arizona, where I'm from, has state identification cards that are basically driver's licenses that don't allow you to drive, right? They can do that, and those are things that are not that difficult, I think, in the long run for them to do. And it just gives them a head start.
I agree.
As you know, people don't think about just the little things that make life so difficult for when they get out.
You're right.
And from banks creating programs to, I guess we'll call it on the front end, these folks getting out, the departments of correction and other institutions at the state, not just giving them $20 and going, good luck, you got released.
Right.
We have an obligation as a society, I think, because we are a society. We don't just live in the wilderness by ourselves. To give them the ability to succeed when they get out. We don't have to do it for them, but we're the land of opportunity. Give them the opportunity, let them do it. And we're kind of pulling that opportunity away from just releasing them.
I think we as a society, certainly our departments of correction, owe a duty to equip those people leaving those institutions for success. Mm-hmm. And you can't necessarily equip somebody with the will, the desire to succeed, the desire to work, the desire to live a law-abiding life. But you can give them the little tools that they need to be able to get their life back in order. And I think what you've just highlighted is exactly correct. Is this a partisan issue?
Shouldn't be. Everything ends up being a partisan issue these days, but it shouldn't be. I mean, this is a human issue, right? I think Republican, Democrat, Independent, Conservative, Liberal, whatever you are, would want people to succeed. It makes it cheaper for the rest of us. It makes society better. It fills those jobs. How many help wanted signs do you see?
Right.
People can live. I don't know if it's the American dream, but the American norm, if there is such a thing.
Yep.
And I think there's little things that can move us towards that goal.
Well, so I totally agree with you. I also think this is a fertile opportunity for people like you or me in how we approach legislators and how we approach administration officials and different state agencies. This is where meaningful change, in my opinion, can happen in our criminal justice system. I think it's easy to focus on huge, big issues that we're trying to fix. In my estimation, though, tweaking and fixing little programmatic aspects of our system can have enormous impacts, right? Addressing the issues of the formerly incarcerated departing a facility without a driver's license or an ID card, to enable them to then get a job, a house, and provide for themselves and their family. I mean, that is an enormous step in the right direction. And so I see that as a perfect example of where we can lean in and try to impact change.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you said it really well a minute ago. Like, we can't give them the will to succeed. We can't give them the desire or even the work ethic, but we can create atmospheres where they have the opportunity. The corny thing in America, you have opportunity, but you're not guaranteed success. You have to make the success. But man, you have the opportunity. We could do the same thing for them. And it's those little tweaks that the state departments of correction can do to make the system better. When I talk about criminal justice and when I talk about departments of correction, I always tell a story about, it's kind of a product, right? What kind of product are we putting out? If it's a failure over and over again, that business wouldn't last. I talk about like Goodyear, who makes tires, who've made tires for hundreds of years, right? Every year, every day, they're doing research and development to make their tires a little bit better, maybe a little safer, maybe a little more cost effective, a little bit better. They never stop. Doesn't mean Goodyear doesn't have a great tire from 10 years ago, but they're trying to make it better. And I think we should take the same approach with departments of correction. Like, we don't have to revamp the whole thing, but man, if we can make it a little better today and then a little better tomorrow and fix it maybe even a little better tomorrow, we're going to continue to make it better and continue to put out a better product.
Yeah, that's right. So I want to shift and speak, kind of coming back to some of the recurring issues that we observe with people who are struggling with getting banking. I presume that you work with probationers, you work with individuals who have violated probation as an example, correct? Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit, educate our listeners a little bit about the risks that population, that specific population. What are the risks that they face, or the dangers that they face in terms of probation violations and kind of getting back into the cycle of being jailed and being incarcerated as a result of these violations?
It's kind of like the story you told earlier. Lots of probation violators are not committing like major violations of their probation, like committing another crime or testing dirty on drug tests or doing drugs or whatever. They're struggling to meet a lot of the financial requirements sometimes, or they're struggling to meet with their probation officer because they don't have a card to get on a bus or whatever. And we had talked a little bit earlier when those we call them technical violations, which we try and have tried to like not send people back to prison for technical violations, but they compile these technical violations. They don't pay their fees that day or that month, and then they don't pay their fees the next month, and then the interest is getting hit, and all of a sudden they have fees that they're never going to be able to pay. And a big reason of that is because Maricopa County Clerk doesn't take cash, so they got to go get money orders, or they have to try to figure out another way to pay this. And again, there's such a mental state to that, because when people come out, and it's not everybody, right? But when people come out of prison and they try very hard to succeed, and it's the little daily things that frustrate them so much and help them, force them not to succeed. They get frustrated, they get down on themselves, and then at some point, and it varies on who it is and how much drive they hit, often you'll see, what's it matter?
Right.
I'm not going to be able to do it anyway. Never going to be able to pay those probation fees. Why should I even try? And eventually that ends up being a warrant. That ends up being a probation officer, or no, usually ends up being a probation warrant, and them being in the car with somebody that's got a broken taillight getting pulled over, and an officer going, "Can I get your ID? I don't have a driver's license."
Yep.
And they go, "Well, my name's Danny Murphy. My date of birth is this." And they're like, "Oh, you have a warrant."
That's right.
Boop, back in. And they're back in jail, and then they're going to start accruing more stuff.
That's exactly right. They go back into the jail, and the downstream impacts are, the child who was expecting mom to pick him up from school that afternoon doesn't come to pick him up because mom has been picked up on a warrant, and all of a sudden that young child is in a lurch. I mean, and needs to find somebody to live with or to stay with or this and that. The impacts on families, the impacts on communities are extraordinary when we continue to put people back into jails. Unfortunately, we see this as a consequence of what you called correctly technical violations. that occur when people fail to pay fines and fees or just can't get out of this financial quicksand that they find themselves in.
And it's amazing to talk about, oh, how's it a banking problem, debanking problem? But man, like, people don't understand. People like us don't understand because we have bank accounts.
That's right.
And things like the impact is so significant. And I'm waiting for that innovator, right? It's hard to innovate in the bank industry. We talked about prosecutorial innovation a little earlier today, but like some entrepreneur, genius, somebody is gonna, I hope, create something where they develop a bank or for these folks.
Yep.
And it's super high risk, right? Maybe they'll get some concessions from Congress and the Bank Secrecy Act and some of that regulation is going, but it's worth doing.
Yep.
Hopefully something like that happens while we're working at, in the departments, and these folks can start normalizing, right? Because once it gets going, it's only going to get better. There's going to be hiccups. I say it all the time. Everybody wants everything to be perfect and a one fix and everything's fixed. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But we have to do something because doing nothing's not the answer.
Well, you mentioned there are some banks, there are some financial institutions who are either trying to rise to the challenge and address a problem, or, as you correctly mentioned, identifying a target market, right? But I also see that some of those institutions are they're abused. Some of those online banking institutions are used quite often for illicit activity, right? I mean, so there's not an easy fix to this, because when we do have financial institutions who want to try to avail themselves to perhaps high risk users, we do see a marketplace of illicit activities that occur, and so there's no question that there's risks associated, and like we said, there's no particularly easy fix. Kurt, always great to see you. I enjoyed the conversation very much. Thank you for joining us. And if you'd like to learn more about debanking or anything else that interests you in criminal justice reform, encourage you to check us out at the Right on Crime podcast. You can check us out on YouTube and on all of your social media platforms. Thank you.